My name is Nova Carter, 35 years old, a financial consultant who has long been used to cold numbers and ruthless contracts. But no deal had ever shaken me the way I felt when I walked into my husband's family's lavish engagement party. The orchestra played, dazzling lights flooded the ballroom, yet there wasn't a single seat reserved for me. Every gaze and spotlight focused on Serena, my future sister-in-law, the woman who had made me a public joke more times than I could count. She raised her glass of champagne, her red lips curving with pride. Some people are only fit to sit in the back, watching our greatness. The entire hall erupted in laughter and applause, while I stood there, silent, as if already resigned to the role of outsider in the very family I had married into. But what they didn't know was that, at that exact moment, in my mind, every chess piece was already being set in place. I wouldn't respond with tears or anger. I would let them laugh, let them gloat, and from that laughter, I would plant the seed of their downfall, one they would never see coming. Have you ever been humiliated in public by those who see you as an outsider? If you've felt that sting, leave a comment below this video. Hit like to give me strength to continue telling this story, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Because from here, my journey of revenge truly begins. I was born into a middle-class family in Ohio. My father was a history teacher, my mother a night shift nurse at the local hospital. My childhood wasn't extravagant, but we lived with decency and diligence. Perhaps that's why when I stepped into the world of the Barlows, where every conversation revolved around multi-million-dollar deals, where the dining table was longer than my parents' entire living room, where people measured each other's worth by cars and real estate, I was instantly seen as a misfit. I met Ethan in graduate school. He was the second son of the Barlow family, not the main heir, and maybe because of that, he was gentle, approachable. He was nothing like Marcus, the ambitious eldest, always placed at the center of attention by his parents. When Ethan and I married, I thought I had found a safe harbor, but I was wrong. Safety only existed when I was with Ethan. The moment I stepped into the Barlow mansion, I became the small-town wife in everyone's eyes. I still remember vividly the first dinner after our wedding. A long table covered with a white cloth, red wine swirling in crystal glasses. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, looked me up and down and said something that sounded like a compliment but carried sharp edges. "That dress looks cute, Nova. I think I saw a similar one at the discount shop downtown. You really do have a simple taste." The whole table burst out laughing. Ethan shifted awkwardly, while I forced a smile. And at that moment, I understood my place here. Never good enough, never refined enough. Of all the people who made me feel small, Serena led the charge. She wasn't just Marcus's fiancée. She was the perfect model the Barlows never stopped praising. Serena grew up in a prestigious family of lawyers in Boston, studied at the Ivy League, always dressed like she'd stepped straight out of glossy fashion magazines. The moment she entered a room, heads turned. Serena had a way of looking down at me, her smile cold, laced with pity. Once, at a cocktail party in the family penthouse, just as I reached for the dessert table, she deliberately said loud enough for everyone to hear, "They say a woman chooses a husband to elevate herself. But some women only drag the whole family down, forcing everyone else to lift them up." Laughter erupted. I heard glasses clink, whispers sparking like flames burning through my pride. Ethan tried to defend me, but his voice was always too small in that family. I endured quietly, but I observed. My career as a financial consultant gave me a different set of eyes. I didn't just hear the barbs. I saw the invisible numbers behind every smile. I noticed delayed contracts, deficits buried in reports Marcus boasted about. They thought I was just the small-town woman, but I had analyzed far more complicated reports for multi-million-dollar funds. On the surface, Barlow Logistics looked solid, but I began to notice cracks. They poured enormous money into international expansion, while domestic routes slowed, costs ballooning. I overheard Marcus snapping into the phone from his office. "If we don't get new cash flow before next quarter, we'll lose the coastal contract." "Mister." Barlow, my father-in-law, still held his dignified presence at parties, but I saw his hand tremble when holding a wine glass. One late night, after everyone had gone, I returned to the living room to grab my purse and accidentally saw Marcus slam a stack of papers on the table, groaning to Serena. "We're sitting on a bomb, but as long as this wedding happens, the Hartleys will pump in capital. After that, who cares?" Serena smoothed back his hair, smiling with confidence. "You just let me handle the media. I'll turn it into the love story of the century. No one will see what's underneath." My heart pounded as I shrank back into the shadows. I began piecing it together. They were betting everything on this marriage. If Serena entered the Barlow family, it wouldn't just be a wedding, it would be a silent merger. The Hartleys controlled strategic shipping routes, while the Barlows held the distribution network. Combined, it could create a giant empire, at least on paper. But I knew behind those glossy contracts, their cash flow was bleeding. Ethan hated talking about the company. One late night he told me, "Don't pay attention. They never listen to me anyway, and I don't want to get involved." But I couldn't ignore it. Not because I was ambitious to change their empire, but because I knew I was standing in the storm. If it all collapsed, Ethan and I would be pulled under with them. Gradually, I realized Serena wasn't just the arrogant woman humiliating me. She was the key player holding the family's biggest secret. And I knew, when that secret exploded, their laughter today would become sobs tomorrow. I stayed quiet, pretended to be naive, pretended I didn't care about their words. But in my mind, the pieces were locking into place. I couldn't change the way they looked down on me, but I could use their scorn as my weapon. Because no one suspects the person they think is harmless. At glamorous parties, I listened to what sounded like meaningless chatter but was full of clues. When they joked about the yacht about to be transferred, or shares temporarily under Serena's name for reporting convenience, I knew it was all smoke and mirrors. And I knew they didn't believe I was smart enough to understand. Every time I saw Serena's self-satisfied, triumphant eyes, my resolve deepened. They saw me as a shadow next to Ethan, but that shadow would be the very thing to swallow their artificial light. I didn't choose this path. They pushed me onto it. And once on it, I would never turn back. One autumn evening, I accompanied Ethan to a fundraising gala in New York. The ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers, soft music floating through the air, everyone dressed in extravagant gowns and tuxedos. I tried to blend in with a simple navy dress, a gift Ethan had saved up to buy me. But in that crowd, my simplicity felt like a stain on pristine fabric. Serena stepped up to the podium, radiant, brimming with smug confidence. She took the microphone, giggled, then cast her eyes on me, her voice dripping with mockery. "Let's thank all our generous donors tonight. From those who've given millions, to those more modest, like my dear sister-in-law, whose personal assets are still rather limited." Her words boomed across the hall through the microphone, sparking laughter that rippled like waves. Some guests glanced at me with pity, others joined in. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, powerless. I lifted my chin, forcing a faint smile. Inside, my chest burned. I didn't respond. I only remembered. Because some humiliations are not meant to be answered right away. They need time to ferment, to grow, to fuel the perfect revenge. From that day, I began moving. I still attended family events, still played the quiet role they cast me in, but behind the scenes, I built connections of my own. As a financial consultant, I had a legitimate reason to meet influential figures in the investment world, people even Marcus had to respect. I listened, I asked questions, I remembered every detail. At a supply chain conference in Chicago, I happened to meet Eleanor Price. She was the CEO of Price Tech Logistics, a tech-driven transport empire competing directly with Barlow. I had heard much about Eleanor, a self-made woman who started as a data analyst and after 15 years had built a company worth billions. As we talked over glasses of wine, I felt the sharpness in her gaze. "Nova Carter?" Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "That name sounds familiar. You're Ethan's wife, aren't you?" Marcus's younger brother? I nodded, keeping my voice calm. That's right. But I don't get too involved in their work. I mainly do independent financial consulting for a few small funds. Eleanor let out a quiet laugh, the kind of laugh from someone who has seen through countless masks. How interesting. Did you know Marcus once cost me a contract worth more than $50 million? Everyone in this industry knows about his dirty tricks. But maybe he never imagined that his enemy could come from inside his own family. Her words froze me for a moment. I had never thought of myself as an enemy of the Barlows. But hearing that, a spark lit inside me. I lowered my voice. Mrs. Eleanor, I don't have Marcus's power, and I don't have Serena's pedigree. But I have eyes, ears, and sometimes information they never expect me to have. Eleanor looked straight at me, her eyes gleaming, then curved her lips. Information is power, Nova. If you really have it, then you are not weak at all. The question is, what do you want? I stayed silent for a few seconds, then whispered, I want them to pay for what they've done, not just to me, but to everyone they've trampled. That conversation opened a new path. Eleanor didn't rush to propose an alliance, but she gave me her business card with a note. When you're ready, call me. From then on, I began collecting data in a more systematic way. I paid attention to every contract, every report Marcus bragged about at the dinner table. I memorized Serena's schedule, her meetings with partners, even her phone habits. Once, when Serena left her purse on a chair, I accidentally saw a folder stamped with the logo of a foreign investment fund. I had heard that name before from former colleagues. It was notorious for shady takeovers. On long nights, when Ethan was asleep, I sat in my small study, laptop open, piecing the fragments together. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The Barlows were building a castle on sand. All their hopes pinned on Marcus and Serena's marriage, because only by tying themselves to the Hartleys would they have enough capital to cover their gaping financial hole. Another time, at Mr. Barlow's birthday dinner, while everyone raised glasses in cheer, Serena laughed loudly and said just enough for the whole table to hear. Nova, can you even calculate? If this family's wealth were divided, you'd only get a modest share. But oh well, luckily you have Ethan, the only one who doesn't care about money. Laughter filled the room again, while I sipped my wine quietly. But inside, that contempt was like wind fanning the flames already burning. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to explain myself. I only needed to wait for the right moment. Gradually, Eleanor and I began communicating more often. At first, it was just market discussions, then private meetings. She told me how Marcus once forced a group of small investors to sell their shares cheaply, leaving entire families with nothing. He thought it would all be forgotten, Eleanor said, her eyes steely. But I never forgot. I understood that feeling. I never forgot either. Eleanor didn't pressure me. She waited, like a warrior who knows the enemy will reveal their own weakness. And that's exactly what happened. The closer it got to the engagement, the more careless Marcus and Serena became. They were too busy boasting, too busy polishing their perfect image, to realize someone was quietly watching from the edges, seeing everything. I became the patient observer. I listened to conversations they thought I couldn't understand. I memorized every look, every frown, every number mentioned. Each piece of information I carefully stored, like small chess pieces ready for a larger game. And the seed of revenge, planted by those early humiliations, began to sprout in me. It grew, rooted deep, waiting for the day it would rise and strip away the glossy facade the Barlows had built. I still remember that night, when all the guests had left the Barlow mansion after yet another grand party. I returned to the living room to fetch the shawl I'd left on the sofa. The vast house was silent, only the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. As I passed Marcus's office, I heard Serena's voice. The door was slightly ajar. I froze, heart pounding, ready to turn away until I caught her words, cold and calculating. After the wedding, we'll have enough voting power. Then, taking over Barlow logistics will just be procedure. I went still. In the dark, I held my breath, listening. Marcus didn't reply. Instead, another man's voice answered, low and gravelly, not belonging to anyone in the family. Good. The fund is ready. As long as you make sure the wedding goes smoothly, the minister will sign off quickly. I shivered. Which minister? Serena chuckled, sharp as a blade. He used to be mine. Even now, if I say the word, he'll listen. Don't worry. As long as I become a Barlow, nothing can stop us. I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had heard too much to doubt it anymore. Serena wasn't just scheming for power through marriage. She was secretly working with a foreign investment fund, with a government minister backing her. On the way home, I said nothing to Ethan. He sat beside me driving, quietly whistling like he always did, while I sat stiff, mind spiraling around every word I had overheard. I realized my husband's family was walking straight into a trap they didn't even see. And Serena? She wasn't here to become the perfect daughter-in-law. She was here to conquer. In the days that followed, I tried to confirm what I'd heard. I was more careful than ever, hiding any unusual interest. But at parties, I noticed Serena often excused herself for a few minutes, phone in hand, returning with a satisfied look. Once, when she set her purse near my chair, I saw a thick envelope. In the corner was the logo of a European financial conglomerate I recognized. It was infamous for hostile takeovers. I told Eleanor during one of our meetings at a small cafe near Central Park. I whispered so softly only she could hear. Serena is working with a foreign fund. I'm certain they plan to swallow Barlow after the marriage. Eleanor's eyes lit with fierce intensity. She leaned in, her voice tinged with satisfaction. I've been waiting for this day. Nova, are you absolutely sure? I nodded. I heard it from their own mouths. And one more thing. I hesitated before continuing. Serena once had an intimate relationship with the Secretary of Commerce. He's the one who will sign off on the merger if everything goes smoothly. Eleanor leaned back in her chair and laughed, the sound bitter. Classic Marcus. He thinks he's using Serena to elevate the company, but in truth, she's the one holding the knife. As for that secretary, I'm not surprised. Politics and business are never separate. I clutched my coffee cup, the heat burning my hand. If this goes through, what happens to Ethan? What about me? Eleanor studied me closely, her eyes softening for just a flicker. If you do nothing, you'll be swept away with them. But if you're clever, you might turn the board around. Her words haunted me for nights. I thought about Ethan, about his gentle nature and his faith that if I was patient enough, his family would eventually accept me. But he had no idea that patience was turning me into a witness to a massive power play. I began paying closer attention whenever Serena left the room. One evening, at a private restaurant Marcus had booked to meet with partners, I saw her step out onto the balcony to take a call. Through the door, I caught fragments. The wedding, voting rights, transfer immediately after. Then her laughter echoed. I returned to the table, pretending ignorance. Marcus kept boasting about intercontinental projects, while Ethan listened awkwardly. Only I knew that beneath those grand words lay a pit waiting to swallow them all. That night, when we got home, I went straight to my study and opened my laptop. I began searching information on the Secretary of Commerce, Robert Halloway. He had been rumored to have an affair years ago, but it was buried under charitable donations and picture-perfect family photos. I wasn't surprised to see Serena appear in a few old photos, standing in the background at an international conference. Back then, no one noticed her. Now, every piece fit perfectly. Eleanor called me the next day. Her voice was low but firm. Nova, this is the opportunity. If we can prove Serena is colluding with a foreign fund, we're not just saving ourselves. We can stop a dirty merger in its tracks. I sat still, the phone pressed to my ear. I could hear my heartbeat clearly. I had never thought I would step into a battle like this. But then I remembered Serena's laughter at the gala, the contempt in the family's eyes. I knew there was no turning back. When Ethan walked into the room, I quickly ended the call. He looked at me with concern. Are you okay? Lately, you always seem deep in thought. I smiled, hiding it. Just some work things. Nothing serious. He placed his hand gently on my shoulder. Don't let them hurt you. To me, you're enough. His words caught in my throat, but I also knew if I didn't stay strong, there would be nothing left for us to hold on to. In the days that followed, I began building a plan. I needed evidence, undeniable documents, and I knew there was only one way: get closer, pretend to be the harmless outsider, so they would never suspect I was quietly digging into their darkest secrets. From that moment, I was no longer just the disregarded daughter-in-law of the Barlow family. I became the only one holding the truth that could bring everything crashing down. I arranged to meet Eleanor at a small cafe by the Hudson River, the kind of place most business people avoided for being too modest. I chose it deliberately, discreet, and safe. When she walked in, gray coat draped over her shoulders, her neatly cropped hair framing sharp eyes, I instantly understood why so many both respected and feared Eleanor Price. She sat across from me, wasting no time. Nova, last time you said Serena had ties to a foreign investment fund. I want details. I took a USB from my bag and set it on the table. This has everything I've gathered. Emails, meeting schedules, forgotten notes. Not enough to destroy them, but enough to prove their scheming. Eleanor picked it up, her finger tapping the plastic casing. You surprise me. I once thought you were just a woman dismissed by her in-laws. But it turns out, you know how to watch and wait. I looked her straight in the eyes, my voice steady. They think I'm harmless, and because of that, I can see what they never expect. But I can't face an entire system alone. I need an ally. Eleanor's lips curved into a smile, not her usual disdain, but something closer to recognition. I'll be your ally. I'll go public, I'll expose them. But you, the one inside, must be the one to place the pieces where they belong. If we coordinate, this strike will take down both Marcus and Serena. I exhaled, feeling both relief and unease. Are you certain about this, Eleanor? They won't sit still while we do it. She leaned forward, eyes blazing. Marcus stole the biggest contract of my career with dirty tricks. I've waited years for this chance. And you, Nova, you have every reason not to turn back. We sat in silence for a few seconds, the faint sound of a spoon stirring coffee filling the air. In that pause, an unspoken alliance was born. No papers, no signatures, just trust and a shared goal: to topple Serena's plan. From that day, I began observing every move in the Barlow household more closely, but I knew I wouldn't be enough on my own. I needed someone inside the family, someone who also saw the hypocrisy and injustice. That person, unexpectedly, was Daniel, the youngest brother, rarely mentioned. Daniel was 26, bright, a graduate in transport engineering, yet always shut out of important meetings by his father and Marcus. They thought he was too young, too soft to handle big business. So Daniel usually sat quietly at the end of the table, listening more than speaking. But I noticed something others ignored. In his eyes was awareness, and in his brief answers there was understanding. One night, after the family had gone to bed following another long dinner, I found Daniel alone in the library, lamplight casting a glow over his thoughtful face. I walked over and asked softly, "Do you ever feel like you don't belong here either?" Daniel looked up, surprised, then let out a wry laugh. "You see it too? Here, everyone talks about profit and market share. All I care about is finding ways to keep the trucks from getting delayed on the highway." I sat across from him, my tone gentle. Don't underestimate that. Real efficiency is in the small things they never pay attention to. He studied me, as if seeing me. You're different. You don't try to show off, but I know you understand more than they think. I smiled, then lowered my voice. Daniel, have you ever considered that Marcus and Serena might not just be trying to expand the company? They might want to make it theirs alone? He frowned. What do you mean by that? I weighed my due choice, then decided to trust him. I told him a few things, not everything, but enough to spark doubt. Daniel went silent, his eyes widening as I mentioned the foreign fund. After a while, he sighed. I'm not surprised. I've seen Serena sending strange files, but when I asked, Marcus said it was just cooperation documents. I knew he was hiding something. I looked at him, my voice deliberate. Will you help me, Daniel? Not for me, but for your family. If you don't, everything your parents built could vanish into outsiders' hands. He stayed quiet for a long moment, then nodded firmly. I'll help. But promise me one thing. Don't drag Ethan into this. He's too kind. He'll be crushed if he's caught in the middle. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I promise. From then on, Daniel became my second ally. He started giving me notes, contract copies, even Marcus's messages left on the computer he could access. He didn't make a show of it, just quietly passed me each fragment, but every piece was precious. Once, Daniel handed me a confidential report about a massive loan Marcus had secretly signed with a European bank, using company shares as collateral. I stared at the numbers, breath tight. If that loan were exposed, Barlow would collapse instantly. But Marcus believed his marriage to Serena would bring in new capital to cover it up. I shared this with Eleanor. In a late-night call, her voice was pensive. Marcus has placed the entire family on the board, but their greatest weakness is arrogance. Serena believes no one in the family could oppose her, and Marcus thinks the youngest brother is just a kid. Nova, we'll use their contempt to defeat them. Hearing that, I felt a determination growing inside me. I now had Eleanor as my ally outside, and Daniel inside. Amid the laughter and sneers, I was quietly gathering each piece of evidence, each truth they never imagined I could reach. One evening, as Ethan and I left a party earlier than usual, Daniel texted me, "Check Serena's desk drawer." I found a way to return, pretending I had forgotten my purse. In the small drawer in the living room, I discovered a folder stamped with the fund's logo. Inside was a draft of the merger plan. On the last page was a preliminary signature, Robert Halloway, Secretary of Commerce. I held the folder in my hands, my breath quickening. This was the proof I needed. I photographed every page with my phone, then carefully put it back. As I walked away, I knew a storm was coming. And for the first time in years as a Barlow daughter-in-law, I no longer felt small. I had allies, I had the truth, and I had time. They had planted the seed of contempt, and I would grow it into a storm to sweep everything away. The engagement party for Marcus and Serena was held at one of Manhattan's most luxurious hotels. Warm golden light poured down from crystal chandeliers, blending with the soft sound of violins. More than 300 guests, politicians, business leaders, the city's elite, gathered to witness the event of the year. I arrived with Ethan in a deep blue gown, understated but elegant. As always, my seat was placed near the back, among distant relatives. I didn't complain. In fact, that seat gave me an advantage. I could observe everything without being noticed. Serena was dazzling in a silver-white gown that hugged her figure, the neckline encrusted with crystals. She moved through the crowd like a queen, her hand lightly resting on Marcus's arm, her smile radiant. Marcus was full of pride that evening, constantly shaking hands, hugging, and speaking non-stop about the glorious future of the Barlow family. Exactly 8 p.m., Marcus rose to his feet and lifted his glass. The chatter died down. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out, "today is not only a day to celebrate my love with Serena, this is also the beginning of a new era. The Barlow Corporation and the Hartley family will unite, creating unprecedented power. From this day forward, we will open a glorious future for both families." Applause echoed throughout the hall. I watched Serena, her chin slightly lifted, her smile triumphant. But at that moment, a strange sound cut through. A phone ringing, then another, then a third. Within seconds, the room filled with dozens of chimes and vibrations. People began pulling out their phones. Whispers spread like wildfire. I saw a businessman's face turn pale, his hand trembling as he scrolled. Then someone blurted out loud, "My God, the Arcadia Fund is under investigation. International money laundering." The atmosphere exploded. Guests bent over their screens, blue light casting shock across their faces. News outlets were updating nonstop. The Federal Investigative Agency had officially announced a probe into the Arcadia Fund, the very fund Serena had been secretly working with. Marcus stood frozen, his wine glass tilting in his hand. Before he could react, another guest shouted, "There are photos too! Serena, with Secretary Holloway?" I could hardly believe how fast it all unfolded. On the phone screens, the images were crystal clear. Serena sitting beside the secretary, her hand on his shoulder, eyes intimate. Another photo showed them leaving a hotel in Geneva during an international trip. Below the pictures, bold captions read, "Affair between Marcus Barlow's fiancée and the Secretary of Commerce." The hall erupted. Murmurs, chairs scraping loudly. A few guests quietly stood up and left, as if afraid to be caught in the scandal. Others lifted their phones to record the reactions. Serena tried to stay composed. She pressed her lips tight and raised her voice. "Those photos are fabricated. This is a deliberate attack on my honor and the Barlow family." But her voice no longer had control. A journalist seated among the guests had just received a breaking update. He stood, holding up his screen. Not just photos, leaked emails too. Secretary Holloway promised to help Arcadia push through the merger if this wedding happened. "It's all been published on the news sites." Marcus turned to Serena, panic in his eyes. What have you done?" Serena gripped his hand tightly, her words a sharp whisper only for him. "Shut up. If you lose control, we'll truly lose." I sat at the back of the room, watching the chaos as blood rushed through me. This was the moment I had waited for with such patience. Ethan sat beside me, bewildered. He whispered, "What's happening, Nova? Why is everyone?" I took his hand, smiling softly. "Some truths always find their way out, Ethan." At the podium, Marcus struggled to regain his voice, turning to the guests. "Please, everyone remain calm. This is surely a plot to sabotage our important event. The Barlow family will handle this immediately." But no one was listening anymore. Groups of guests streamed out. The whispers echoed. "So shameful," and tied to the secretary, "The Barlows are finished." Serena remained standing, her face pale but her eyes still flashing defiance. She scanned the room as if searching for the one pulling the strings. When her gaze swept over me, I quietly raised my glass, letting the light reflect through the rim. A fleeting moment, but I knew she understood. That night, without me lifting another finger, everything collapsed on its own. News spread across every site. Photos of Serena and Secretary Holloway splashed across TV screens. People buzzed nonstop about the scandal, about the triangle of power, money, and desire. And in it all, the Barlow name was dragged into the mud. As we left the hotel, I heard Ethan whisper, "I've never seen Marcus so humiliated. And Serena, do you think they can survive this?" I squeezed his hand, my eyes on the city lights outside the car window. "No one survives once the truth is exposed, Ethan. Only those brave enough to face it can." Inside me, a strange calm spread. I had waited 3 years for this, the moment when their arrogance and schemes turned to ashes before the very eyes of those who once praised them. And I knew this was only the beginning of the storm. After that chaotic engagement night, the entire city roared. News outlets reported nonstop, TV and online headlines buzzing with Serena and Secretary Holloway. The Barlow family became the center of outrage. Marcus buried himself in endless calls, trying to put out fires, but the more he explained, the more he looked like a liar. Serena nearly vanished from the public eye, locking herself away, issuing only haughty, meaningless statements. While the household unraveled, I quietly prepared my next move. What had just happened only disgraced them. I needed a blow that would strip their power completely. One evening, when the family gathered in the mansion's boardroom, the air thick with tension, Nathaniel Barlow, the father, face flushed red, slammed his hand on the table. "Marcus, explain yourself. How could Serena be tied to that filthy Arcadia fund?" Marcus, sweat dripping down his forehead, stammered, "Dad, it's all rumors. We still hold all the shares. We're still in control." I sat silently at the end of the table. Ethan beside me shifted nervously, as if questioning why I was even there. I gently squeezed his hand, my gaze calm. Nathaniel growled. Shares? If the shares were secure, the market wouldn't be crashing like this. Partners are canceling meetings by the hour. Banks are demanding credit reevaluations. This entire empire is on the brink of collapse. Serena lifted her head, her pale face masking a sharp tone. We can turn this around if we control the media. Don't let a few cheap photos destroy everything. I let out a quiet laugh. The sound cut through the room like a knife. Every eye snapped toward me. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. What are you laughing at, Nova? Calmly, I placed a thick folder on the table. Because you still think you're in control. But the truth says otherwise. Marcus's face twisted, his voice dripping with disdain. What right do you have to interfere? This is my family's business. I opened the folder, each page stamped with signatures and seals. 3 years ago, Ethan established a trust under my name. Back then, no one noticed, thinking he was just indulging his wife. But in reality, that trust holds 15% of Barlow Logistics' strategic shares. And according to its terms, all voting rights now belong to me. The room fell dead silent. Marcus shot to his feet, his face drained of color. Impossible! Those shares have always been in the family's hands. I looked straight at him, my voice steady. The family may think so, but the law says otherwise. These are fully notarized documents, registered with the Securities Commission. From now on, in every board meeting, I'll be the one deciding. Serena's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she clenched them tight. You're just an outsider. No one will accept you running things. I tilted my head, my tone soft but cutting into her pride. They may not accept it, but they'll obey. Because the law doesn't care what you like or not. Nathaniel slumped into his chair, his hands clutching his head. He muttered, Ethan, my son, why would you do this? Why give the shares to her? Ethan stared in shock, clearly blindsided. He turned to me, his voice shaky. Nova, is this true? You knew all along? I laid my hand over his and nodded gently. You signed the trust to protect me, Ethan. I just continued protecting both of us. Without this step, we would have sunk with them long ago. Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions. Shock, confusion, and rising respect he had never shown me before. Marcus roared, lunging toward me. You have no right. I'm the one in charge. You think those shares are enough to topple me? Daniel, sitting in the corner of the room, suddenly stood up. His voice was deep but firm. You're wrong, Marcus. Nova has the right, and I will stand with her. I also have 3% of the shares that Mother passed down to me. With hers, we have enough to force you out of the seat. Marcus whipped around, eyes blazing. You're betraying the family, Daniel? Daniel didn't flinch. No. I'm protecting the family from you and Serena. The two of you have dragged the company into the abyss. It's time someone sane put a stop to it. The air in the room thickened, heavy to the point of suffocation. I saw in Marcus and Serena's eyes a mix of desperation and rage. They had never imagined that a woman like me, the one they had humiliated for years, would be the one to turn the tables. I closed the folder, my voice calm. You can keep denying, but tomorrow morning, I will present the new voting rights to the board. And at that point, nothing will be your choice anymore. Serena shot to her feet and stormed out of the room, her heels striking the wooden floor with sharp echoes. Marcus slumped down, his eyes hollow like a man stripped of his weapon. Nathaniel stayed silent, no longer strong enough to roar. Only Ethan kept his eyes on me, as if finally realizing that the wife he once thought fragile was the very person carrying the family's fate. I turned to him, smiling gently. I'm not weak, Ethan. I was only waiting for the right moment to be strong. In that moment, I knew the board had shifted sides, and from now on, every move would be mine to command. The next morning, news exploded like a storm sweeping across the entire city. Major newspapers ran bold front-page headlines. Arcadia Fund under money laundering investigation, tied to the Barlow family and Secretary of Commerce. Television kept broadcasting images of Serena leaving a hotel with her head hung low, reporters swarming her, microphones thrust forward as if tearing the air apart. Strategic partners reacted immediately. Phones rang nonstop at the Barlow offices, not to congratulate, but to announce contract cancellations. First came a shipping conglomerate in Florida, then a cold storage network in Chicago, followed by a chain of fuel suppliers in Texas. Each time Daniel updated the news, Marcus slammed the table, while Nathaniel sat dazed, his hands trembling as he held a cup of cold coffee. I quietly observed everything. Each link was falling apart exactly as I had envisioned. Barlow stock began plummeting straight down. From morning until afternoon, nearly 20% of the company's value evaporated. Updates flashed by the minute, by the second. I heard Ethan reading from his computer screen, his voice shaking. "They're calling today Barlow's Black Monday." Marcus hurriedly summoned the board of directors to headquarters. The large meeting room glowed under dozens of lights, but no brightness could dispel the icy chill in the air. Members fired questions one after another. An older man with silver hair snapped, "Marcus, how do you explain that the Arcadia Fund, the partner you assured us was completely trustworthy, is now under international money laundering investigation?" Marcus tried to keep calm, but sweat rolled down his forehead. "This was an unforeseen incident. We still have other resources. Don't forget, Serena and I." Before he could finish, a female board member cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "Serena? That name now means scandal. Do you realize how many articles are spreading her photos with Secretary Holloway? You expect us to believe a marriage tainted by disgrace will save this company?" Marcus was stunned, his face red with both anger and shame. Outside the boardroom, Serena faced a storm of her own. The same magazines, that once hailed her as the new icon of high society, now exposed the truth. They dug up old photos, vague connections, and suspicious trips. Social media roared with thousands of mocking, critical, even furious comments. The next day, Serena appeared at the front of the Barlow mansion, her face half hidden behind dark glasses, hair disheveled. Reporters swarmed. One shouted, "Serena, is it true you used a romantic relationship with the secretary to secure backing for Arcadia?" Serena gritted her teeth and rushed inside, but the footage had already gone live, broadcast nationwide. Just hours later, the Hartley family, the ones Marcus and Serena intended to bind through marriage, announced the wedding was canceled. Their statement was brief. "The Hartley family is not involved and cannot be tied to any scandal that would compromise our reputation." When Marcus heard the news, he smashed the crystal glass in his hand. "No, they can't do this. They need us." Nathaniel looked at his son, his gaze heavy. "No, Marcus. It's us who needed them. And now, it's over." The bad news didn't stop there. That afternoon, the Secretary of Commerce's office officially announced Robert Holloway's resignation. The phrase, "resigning for personal reasons," fooled no one. News channels analyzed endlessly, revealing that the investigation would likely widen, pulling in other political figures. What started as a business family scandal had now rippled into government, becoming a national earthquake. Inside the Barlow mansion, the atmosphere was like a funeral. The walls lined with priceless art now echoed only with heavy arguments. Marcus shouted at his father, "If you had given me control earlier, if you hadn't been so stubborn, we wouldn't have lost." Nathaniel's face went pale as he raised his hand. "It was you and Serena who dragged this family to ruin. Don't blame anyone else." Ethan sat quietly beside me, his hands clenched. He whispered, "I've never seen Dad and Marcus like this. Nova, everything is really falling apart." I turned to him, my voice soft but steady. "This was inevitable. Arrogance and lies always have a price." Daniel entered, phone in hand, his face tense. Latest update. Stocks dropped another 10%. If this continues, the company will be forced to suspend trading. Marcus staggered back into his chair, stunned. Serena sat slumped, her makeup smeared. No longer the proud queen, she was now just a wrecked figure, trembling under the storm of public fury. But I felt no pity. I remembered every word she had mocked me with at parties, every disdainful glance when I entered a room. And now, those laughs had become knives cutting into her own skin. That evening, more news hit. Partner banks demanded Barlow provide additional collateral or face credit cuts. Some small investors filed lawsuits, claiming they were deceived by false financial reports. On television, analysts commented, "This could be the fastest collapse of a logistics empire in decades." Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Nova, did you know all of this beforehand? Were you prepared for this?" I placed my hand over his, gentle yet firm. "I can't stop the storm, Ethan, but I can make sure we're not swept away with it." He stayed silent for a long time. Then finally, he exhaled and nodded. "I was wrong to think you were weak. You never were." In that moment, I saw absolute trust in his eyes. No longer the pitying gaze of a husband who felt sorry for a wife scorned by his family, but respect for a true partner. Meanwhile, Marcus still tried to salvage what he could. He ran out, seeking old partners, but every door was shut. Some wouldn't even take his calls. Serena vanished from society, no longer receiving any invitations to elite parties. From social queen to public joke. And Secretary Holloway, the man once confident on stage before thousands of voters, now quietly left office amid public outrage. One reporter remarked, "Never before has a corporate scandal toppled a political career this quickly." I sat in my small room, light from the window spilling over the files I had gathered for 3 years. Outside, the Barlow empire was collapsing piece by piece, and I, the one they once despised, was now the only person clear-headed enough to witness and steer each step of that downfall. In that silence, I understood. This wasn't the ending. This was only the beginning of a painful transformation. For the Barlows, for Serena, and for me. One drizzly night, while the city still buzzed about the chain reaction collapse of the Barlow Corporation, I returned to my small house in Brooklyn. Ethan was fast asleep on the sofa, while Daniel remained at headquarters handling the final wreckage. As I closed the door, I noticed a figure standing under the eaves, trembling in the cold wind. Serena. She was no longer the dazzling queen of glittering parties. Her golden hair was now ragged, dark circles under her eyes, makeup smeared by the rain. The designer coat she once flaunted was drenched, crumpled. Serena's eyes held no pride, only despair. "You've buried me," her voice cracked, hoarse and jagged like a broken blade. "But you've also buried yourself. They'll never forgive you, Nova." I stood still, letting the cold wind sting my face, then replied calmly, "I don't need their forgiveness. I only need freedom." Serena gave a bitter laugh, but it was so forced it hurt to hear. "Freedom? You think escaping this circle is that easy? I once believed that too, but in the end, I was devoured." I stayed silent, looking into her hollow eyes. They no longer held defiance, only the raw emptiness of someone completely spent. Bracing herself against the wall, her voice faltered. "Do you know why I chose Marcus? Not for love, not for money. It was the only escape. I thought I had. I was once like you, Nova, dragged into parties where everything was just a power game, forced to smile when all I wanted was to scream. But instead of running, I learned to manipulate. Because at least, when I controlled others, I no longer felt like the victim." I listened without interrupting. Serena's words carried no mockery, only a bitterness too heavy to name. "You think I was never weak?" she went on, her eyes glistening in the dark. "Back in college, I loved someone. An ordinary man, no money, no status. We promised to run away, live a different life. But when my father found out, he called Marcus. He told me straight, 'If you want this family to survive, you will marry into the Barlows.' Stop dreaming." I still remember Marcus's eyes that day, cold, calculating, as if I were nothing but a commodity to trade. And I agreed. I abandoned love, abandoned my dreams. I walked into that house, determined never to be forced again. I swore I would. Hold the wheel, no matter the cost. A long silence stretched, broken only by raindrops tapping against the roof. I didn't see an enemy in Serena, but a person crushed by a ruthless machine who chose to survive by becoming part of it. I sighed, my voice steady. You chose your path. But in becoming the manipulator, you became a replica of the very people who destroyed you. And that's why you failed. Serena lifted her head, a flash of pain in her eyes. Maybe you're right. But at least, for a few years, I didn't feel small. I made them listen to me. What about you, Nova? You're strong today, but what about tomorrow? When other forces come for you, you'll face the same choice. And then, maybe you'll be just like me. I met her gaze, calm. Maybe. But I differ from you in one thing. I don't do this for power. I do this to win back freedom for myself and those I love. And that will keep me from becoming what I despise. Serena stayed quiet. Her face twitched, as if at war with itself. For a flicker, I saw admiration mixed with envy in her eyes. Then she stepped back, her soaked hair falling over her face. You've won, Nova. But remember, victory never comes cheap. She turned away, her figure staggering into the rain, leaving me standing silent under the eaves, my heart weighed down. I gently closed the door and returned to the living room. Ethan still slept soundly, unaware of the conversation that had just unfolded outside. I looked at my husband, his broad but gentle shoulders, and remembered Serena's words. The cost of victory? Was I ready to pay it? Her final words echoed in my mind. Serena had once been a victim, and to stop being one, she chose to become a manipulator. But that path consumed her completely. I vowed to myself, I would never let it consume me. I would fight, but to free, not to imprison. And in that moment, I knew my real battle wasn't just with Marcus or Serena, but with the shadow lurking within, myself. In the weeks after that confrontation, I watched the Barlow family collapse beyond repair. Marcus was voted out as CEO by the board. The last remaining partners abandoned him, and employees who once flattered him turned away as quickly as the wind changes. Nathaniel, once the powerful patriarch, finally appeared before the press to announce his resignation. He stood at the podium, aged a decade, his voice hoarse. For the stability of the company and to pave the way for a new generation, I stepped down. But everyone knew it was only a mask for bitter defeat. The Barlow mansion, once alive with parties, now stood heavy and silent like a mausoleum. Ethan glanced around one last time, sadness flickering in his eyes. He held my hand, his voice soft. I don't want to stay here another day. We need to start a new life, Nova. I agreed immediately, so we moved into a small two-story house in the suburbs of Boston. It wasn't luxurious, its white paint faded with time, but it had a backyard garden and wide windows for the morning sun. I saw Ethan sleep deeply, not startled awake by work calls. He smiled gently, placing his hand over mine. This is home, Nova, not those cold walls. I knew that to keep this peace, I needed to move forward, but not in the shadows the Barlows had built. I had to create something entirely different. One afternoon, I met Eleanor at her temporary office downtown. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a trust I had never seen from anyone in my former husband's family. Nova, we have an opportunity. With the Barlows in ruins, the logistics market has a massive gap. If we seize it, we'll replace them. I nodded, spreading out the plan I had prepared on the table. I've been thinking, unlike the Barlows, we can't build an empire on dirty political ties or showmanship. We'll do the opposite. Transparency, innovation, and putting people at the center. Eleanor stared at me, then smiled. The smile of someone who had finally found a true ally. I've been waiting to hear that. Then let's begin. Horizon Global was born that way. I chose the name because it spoke of a new horizon, a place without the shadows of the past, where everything could be rebuilt from the ground up. We rented an old office in a red brick building, not far from the train station. The furnishings were simple, old wooden desks, a few swivel chairs, a whiteboard. But inside that room, I could feel the undeniable strength waiting to rise. Daniel was the first to knock on the door. He stood before me, holding a stack of files, his smile tinged with hesitation. Nova, I know you don't want to be tied to the family anymore, but if you'll allow it, I want to join. I want to build a company I believe in, not one that only chases power. I looked at him, remembering the way Daniel had bravely stood up in the boardroom when Marcus shouted him down. I nodded, my voice warm. You don't need my permission, Daniel. You've proven yourself worthy. Let's begin together. So there were three co-founders, me, Eleanor, and Daniel. Ethan didn't take part in operations, but he was my steady support. He chose to teach at a business school in Boston, saying it was the work that made him happy. I knew he wanted me to have the freedom to devote myself fully to Horizon without worry. In the beginning, we worked tirelessly from morning to night. I remember Eleanor and I sitting across from each other at the old wooden table, papers scattered everywhere, coffee gone cold in our cups. Daniel sketched out technological solutions to optimize trucking. If our trucks can be tracked in real time with transparent data, customers will see the difference, he explained eagerly, his eyes glowing. We didn't have the deep capital Barlow once flaunted, but we had credibility. When Eleanor and I presented our plan to a group of investors who had just pulled out of Barlow's projects, they listened intently. One of them said, "We had lost faith in this market. But hearing you speak about transparency and social responsibility, we see a reason to return." Horizon Global received its first seed funding from the very investors who had abandoned Barlow. It was ironic, but it proved change was possible. I still remember the night we signed our first contract. It was with a small organic food company in Vermont. The director shook my hand firmly and said, "We don't need a giant corporation with a flashy logo. We need a partner who truly cares that our goods reach customers on time and safely. If Horizon can deliver that, we'll be with you for the long run." I stepped out of the office that night, the Boston wind sharp and cold, but my heart warm. Ethan waited in the car, looking at me with pride. "I've never seen you shine like this, Nova." I smiled, hugging him tightly. Because this time, I'm not fighting to be accepted. I'm fighting to build. Daniel, young and full of drive, became the bridge between a new generation and Eleanor's seasoned experience. One time, sitting beside me sipping coffee, he said, "I used to think I'd always be overlooked. But thanks to you, I realized I can be more." I touched his shoulder lightly, answering softly, "Not thanks to me. You stepped out of the shadows yourself." Those days were full of hardship but also full of hope. While the Barlows crumbled, we quietly laid a new foundation. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free, no longer chained to disdainful glances, no longer an outsider. I was a builder, the writer of my own future. One crisp autumn morning, as sunlight spilled gently through the windows of Horizon Global, I received a cream-colored envelope, no sender, only a Swiss postmark. I was surprised, since we'd never dealt with any partners there. I opened it. Inside was a printed photo. In it, Serena sat in the front row of a classroom, hair tied back, dressed in a plain white blouse, her empty eyes fixed on the board. Above the board, bold English words read, "Corporate Communication Skills, Intensive Course." I recognized it instantly. Not a regular class, but an image rehabilitation program used by major financial institutions for disgraced figures. Accompanying the photo was a handwritten note, italic letters, sharp and dark. "The game isn't over." I sat quietly for a moment, hearing the wind outside and Daniel's keyboard tapping in the next room. Inside me stirred a strange mix, surprise but not shock. Serena was still Serena, proud to the end, even with her reputation in ruins. I smiled faintly. Not a smile of triumph, nor of mockery, but one of calm. I slipped the photo into my desk drawer and locked it away. I didn't need to show it to anyone, didn't need to prove anything more. Because I knew, in this world, no game ever truly ends. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by the office. He had just finished a lecture at school and brought me a pastry from my favorite bakery. Seeing me thoughtful, he asked, "Something wrong, Nova?" I shook my head, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. "Just a letter from Europe. Nothing important." He narrowed his eyes, but didn't press. Ethan always respected my boundaries. Instead, he sat across from me, smiling. "You know, today a student asked me what matters most in business. I told them, not profit, but the freedom to choose the right path." I gazed at him for a long time. Freedom. The very word I had said to Serena that rainy night. And now, I was living in it, day by day. Daniel walked in, holding a report. "Nova, Horizon just signed 2 more contracts. One in California, one in Maine. We're expanding faster than expected." He was young, eyes burning with passion. Eleanor also called, her voice brimming with conviction. "Nova, you've done what many thought impossible. Horizon isn't just a company, it's becoming a symbol." I smiled, folded the anonymous note, and tucked it into a separate file. I wouldn't let it haunt me, but I kept it as a reminder. Because I knew, in the world of power and money, every action, no matter how small, creates ripples. Some waves lap gently against the shore, but some are strong enough to sink empires. I had chosen not to be a victim, not to let anyone dictate my fate. I chose to be the one steering. And with that choice, I knew, whatever games remained, I was ready. Looking at Serena's photo in the drawer, I thought, each of us has a way of facing old wounds. Some choose to let go, some choose to fight, and some choose to manipulate so they never feel weak again. But in the end, what matters most isn't whether they won, but what they sacrificed to survive. What about you? If you were in my place, would you choose to stay silent and endure, or stand up and steer your own life? I truly want to hear your thoughts about this story. Leave a comment below. Maybe your experience will give strength to someone still walking through the dark. And if you want to keep journeying with me to hear more stories about family, about schemes, about how we find ourselves again in the storm, don't forget to follow the channel. Because behind every closed door, another story is always waiting to be told.